Hello and welcome to my weekly Hebrew. Although I don't think it's going to be Hebrew for very long because I've been doing Hebrew a very long time and I usually alternate between a long time in Greek and a long time in Hebrew. Well, I've been doing Hebrew for a long time. So I think I'm going to switch after next week. Next week, I'm going to do one more session in Hebrew. And then I think I'm going to go to a verse a week from Revelation because that's what I'm doing my Through the Bible podcast on. But today, Genesis 3:15. Have you ever noticed that there are a number of important 3:15, 3:16 verses? John 3:16, 1 Peter 3:16, or is it 15? Might be 15. But anyway, 2 Timothy 3:16, a lot of important 3:15 verses. Anyway, interesting. Well, this is our Hebrew for today. So let's start. See if you can translate that if you're good at Hebrew. Here is my translation. Va'eva and hatred, ashit, I will put, be'naka, between you, uvein ha'isha, and the woman. Uvein zaraka, and between your seed, and that's where this line ends. So what have we just said? Va'eva, and hatred. So there's the vav, and then eva is hatred. The context is God is talking about the consequences of the sins of Adam, Eve, and the serpent. And so he starts off talking to the serpent. By the way, Genesis does not say that the serpent is Satan. Now, in hindsight, theologically, I believe the serpent was Satan. However, in my opinion, at the time that Genesis was written, Israel did not yet understand that there was a Satan. In my opinion, the idea of Satan is a concept that God didn't turn the lights on in regard to until after the exile. And so I do not believe that Israel yet understood the function of the Satan at this time. And so the very first Jewish literature in which the serpent is identified as Satan is not until the 1st century BC, within 100 years of Jesus, is the very first Jewish literature that references the serpent as Satan. Not even the book of Jubilees, which is in 150 BC, references the serpent as Satan. This is amazing. And so in hindsight, I do believe the serpent was Satan, but none of the Old Testament authors understood that. Well, I mean, they may have, but they didn't say it. That's for sure. Okay, interesting tidbit. Well, let's keep going here. So here are the consequences to the serpent for this sin. And hatred I will put. Now this is an imperfect. Imperfect, put things on the front. Perfect, put things on the end. And so the aleph here is where the I comes from. And then sheet is to put or place. So I will put hatred, and hatred I will put. And of course, serpents and humans don't get along very well, do they? And I will talk about the kind of messianic interpretation of this verse in a second. But it is important to realize that the Old Testament did not understand the messianic interpretation of this verse. There is no indication in Genesis or anywhere else in the Old Testament that this verse was taken in a messianic sense. In fact, there's barely anything in the New Testament. There's some hints. There are hints in the New Testament that the New Testament Christians took this verse messianically. So again, I have no problem with multiple readings of a verse. Right now, I want to focus on what the original meaning of the verse is. And the original meaning of the verse is snakes and people, they ain't going to get along anymore. In fact, I'm not sure they ever did, although Eve talks to the serpent just fine. But anyway, and hatred I will put, be'naka, between you. So bein is between, and then ka is you. Between you and uvein, and between ha-isha, and the woman. So the hey on the front is the word the. Normally it would be hey, patak, doubling, but alephs don't do doubling. It's not in their contract. And so he tried to shoot a dagesh into the aleph and it bounced back. ricocheted and made a kamatz out of a guitar. Anyway, that's not true at all. Okay, so and between the woman, uvein, and between zar ka, or probably zar ka. Usually in this situation, the second to last syllable is accentuated, like in here, beineka, but beineka is probably how it's pronounced. And so this would be zareka, your seed. Zara, 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 seed. Anyway, your seed, uvein, zara, and her seed. Okay, and between her seed. This hey with a mapik in it says that this is a true hey consonant. A lot of time, like kamatz hey, that's a vowel letter. This kamatz piggybacking on the hey, and it's really empty. It's just it's not a consonant. It's not solid. But a hey with a mapik in it, now that's a real hey. Zar and this means her seed, and between her seed. Who is he? Hebrew is a language where who is he, and the word he is she, and dog is fish, and me is who. Anyway, memory stuff. Okay, and he, Yashufeka, another one of these kas on the end. So your heel, or I'm sorry, he will bruise you. So who will bruise you? It's a masculine with a yod on the front. So it's the seed, masculine. The seed will bruise you. Now, again, the original meaning is very limited here. It's simply saying the seed of the woman, in other words, guys, and of course, girls too. My wife stepped on a brown recluse in broad daylight this past weekend. I mean, it was a huge spider. She just smacked that thing. Now, I've had some experience with her and snakes, and probably wouldn't be quite so bold. I might not be either. But let's just say humans and snakes don't get along, and certainly I have no problem with using a shovel to, have my way with a snake. Anyway, usually I use a car, but that's not important right now. But humans and snakes don't get along. There's hatred between the snake and the woman, and between the children of women. Ta-da! I'm a children of a woman, and snakes. There's still enmity, and I crush the head of the snake. Whenever I see a snake, I like to crush a head. Now, of course, if it's a nice little grass snake, fine, no problem. But anyway, he will bruise you. God is talking to the snake on the head, rosh. He will bruise your rosh, and ata, and you will bruise him. That is, the snake will bruise him on the heel. So this is about, again, I prefer to use a shovel than my heel. But this is a verse that in the original meaning of this verse is simply saying, as a result of this, humans and snakes are not going to get along together. Humans are going to stomp on your head, and it's going to bruise your head, and it's going to bruise his heel too. And humans and snakes, they're just not going to get along anymore. Okay, so there you have kind of the original meaning. Now, of course, around the time of Christ, the serpent came to be understood to be Satan. And of course, I believe that's an accurate interpretation. Again, it's not, the Old Testament has no indication that it understood that. And it's not until around the time of Christ that that understanding arguably arises. But the New Testament then understands the seed of the woman here to be Jesus. And Jesus is the one who crushes the head of Satan victoriously as he rises from the dead. He defeats the one having the power of death, that is the devil. He stomps on the devil's head. Now, again, even though that's a pretty standard Christian interpretation of this verse, it's really more a matter of Christian tradition than even the New Testament. There are only some slight hints of it. So, for example, Romans is it 15, where Paul says, may God trample Satan under your feet. It's not even talking about Jesus there in Romans. Paul is talking about God crushing Satan under the feet of the Christian community at Rome. And then, of course, the great serpent is mentioned in Revelation as well, which is a reference to Satan. Interesting how it is often difficult for us to tell the difference between Christian tradition and listening to the text. In this case, there's at least a double layer, maybe actually a triple layer of potential Christian meaning to this verse. The original meaning, the Jewish meaning, the Genesis meaning is snakes and people aren't going to get along. Then there's the God will crush Satan under your feet, the meaning that refers to the church defeating Satan, which is the Romans meaning. And then there's the kind of Christian tradition meaning where this is a kind of a prophecy of Jesus. Not a prophecy in the mind of Moses, say, or of the author of Genesis, but a prophecy in the understanding of the church, a theological reading of the verse. Well, there you have it, Genesis 3:15. Back next week for our final verse in Genesis.